Trigger warning. This story is not for the faint of heart and addresses themes of substance abuse, sexual assault, and traumas relating to both. All My Past and Futures, written by Valor48. I refused to sink. Those words held little meaning for me when I had them tattooed years ago. They just sounded deep. The placement, under my breast, had been a poor choice, fueled by a wild night out and a few too many drinks. If only I'd known then how much those 4 words would come to define me, and how much they wouldn't. It's hard to pinpoint when everything turned to shit. Of course, there was the day it happened, but so much else had been going on in the days leading up to it that they'd blurred together. The shit V was going through, everything with the recording studio, my own stubborn refusal to deal with my past. It's a fucking miracle I could even think straight. Oddly enough, my mind kept coming back to the night Susie Q came into my den with that braindance. It shouldn't have set me off the way it did, considering I'd seen so many like it before. I was hunched over my desk, nursing a crick in my neck when the door slid open. I didn't need to turn around. The fucking clacking of those footsteps of hers were unmistakable. Judy! Wincing, I spun around. Why the hell did she always have to yell? Mierda! What, Susie? I'm not in a fucking edit. And how the hell am I supposed to know what you're doing? Susie crossed her arms. Don't snap at me. Susie may have had a run of Lizzie's bar, but she had a lot to learn about basic courtesy. And judging from the extensive facial chrome and sharp spikes protruding from her cybernetic arms, a pleasant demeanor didn't seem to be high on her priority list. If you see this on my head, I shook my braindance wreath at her, then I'm editing and won't hear you. Otherwise, go easy on the ears. The silence was jarring. I hadn't expected for Susie to actually cut her tirade short. You finished? She huffed. What do you want? Client came in and dropped this off. Susie held up a shard. He's offering preem eddies to get an edit done tonight. Bump it up the list. God damn it, eddies, and more eddies. It's all she ever fucking cared about. Can it wait? I just started in on this one. No, it can't fucking wait, she shouted. I just told you the client's paying top dollar. Ditch the other one and get started. I tossed my wreath aside, wincing as it crashed onto the table. My cut of the week's BDs would vanish if I had to buy a replacement. It ain't that easy, Susie. We're not a fucking chop shop here. It takes time, focus to get it I don't want another lecture about the art of cranking up something for some shithead to jerk off to. I don't have time for your bullshit. Susie tossed the shard next to the wreath. Get on with it. My fist slammed against the desk. I'd lost count of how many times that exchange had played out over the years. The room echoed with our tired bickering. I wanted to scream. The same icy surfaces stared back at me, uninterrupted only by the occasional monitor or server. A piece of litter stuffed in a corner caught my attention. I recognized it as a note I'd jotted down and tossed away more than a year ago on a scrolling idea that I'd ultimately ended up scrapping. Had it been sitting there all this time? I looked back at the shard. Fuck it. I heaved a sigh, grabbed my wreath, making sure all the sensors were still in place and sliding the shard into it. While the system checked to make sure the shard didn't contain any viruses or sensory spikes, I ran a hand through my hair. The blue tips were sneaking their way past my shoulder. I was still on the fence with how long I wanted to grow it out. V seemed to like it and never stopped raving about the color, but it was a bitch to keep up with, and I was always getting it tangled in my neural port. A beep drew my attention back to the monitor. With the security check out of the way, I stood and stretched. Grabbing the wreath, I threw myself into the editing chair. It had seen better days. The synth leather was torn and covered in scratch marks lining its surface. I sat back and rested the wreath over my head. The comforting metal frame slid into place just as it had done countless times before. My editing glove remained in my drawer. I had no idea what kind of smut I was diving into, and it was always good to get a fresh perspective first. I settled back and fired up the scroll. My own senses drifted away. The sensors over my eyes flickered as I was thrust into a new perspective. And this was always the hardest part of experiencing any BD, trying to acclimate to the sudden change of everything. Would I find myself as a woman or a man? Indoors or outdoors, alone or in a group? What would I be doing? A row of harsh neon lights shone above me, casting a pale glow across bare walls riddled with divots and scratches. I sighed, resigning myself to yet another piece of sketchy amateur porn. A rough hand, my hand, came into view and motioned for a figure standing in the doorway to approach. It was a woman with fair skin and long black hair flowing elegantly down the slope of her back. She wore nothing other than a red lace bra and matching panties. Her hands fidgeted and her wide eyes darted about. To call her a woman was a gross exaggeration. She couldn't have been more than 18, judging from her fresh rounded features and lack of cyberwear. No tattoos either, a stark contrast from my own skin. I forced my real head to shake in frustration while the scroll continued playing. My vision flickered from the conflicting sensory feedback. I'd seen this story dozens of times before. A recording studio had lured some attractive girl off the streets with promises of big fame and easy eddies. All it would take is 20 minutes, 15 if she was exceptionally good, and she would be on the path to stardom. The woman stopped in front of the man I was inhabiting. That same hand reached out and clumsily rested on her shoulder. For a moment, I thought he was actually trying to comfort her. Instead, his fingers curled under the strap of her bra and crudely pulled it down. My stomach turned as she was led towards the thin, stained mattress splayed on the floor. The scroller wasn't focused on the way her muscles trembled, and what had started out as a jumbled mess of thoughts was quickly honing in on one thing. My hand spun her around, ignoring her surprised yelp, and forced her down onto her hands and knees. I could feel my heart racing. His heart, as I yanked her panties down and knelt down behind her. I tore the wreath off my head. A strong wave of nausea washed over me as my senses protested against the exit. But I didn't give a fuck. This was wrong. This wasn't some white-collar corpo getting his rocks off by snorting a few lines of dust off of Joy Toy's tits. The girl was clearly scared shitless, and the scroller was enjoying every second of it. My blood boiled. I had joined the mocks to protect girls like this, not to play a part in their victimization. That was what the whole point of the gang was supposed to be about, the reason so many members were former dolls and Joy Toys. When I was sure I wasn't going to hurl my lunch onto the floor, I leapt off the chair and stormed upstairs. It wasn't the first time I'd marched through Lizzie's like this, but it was damn sure going to be the loudest. I charged across the back room, ignoring the stairs. I was in Susie's face before her office door had finished sliding open. Did you even ask the client what the fuck that was? Susie spun around in her chair so quickly it crashed against the desk, shaking her monitors. What the fuck are you talking about, Alvarez? What am I talking about? That fucking shard you just dropped off. The one with the girl, who might not even be legal, getting fucked by some creep who's getting off on making her feel scared. A long silence stretched between us. The girl's legal, Susie finally said. And how the fuck do you know that? Susie huffed an exasperated sigh and rolled her chair back towards her desk and shuffled through its contents. Here. She held a thin tablet in her hand that seemed to taunt me. I took it and read the text displayed on the screen. It was the recording contract. The girl's name was Katie Elkram. Her signature and bioprint were at the bottom of the contract, just below the clause verifying she was of legal age. We're not here to vet out every client's tastes to see if they meet your high standards. The girl signed on the dotted line. I could already feel heat rushing into my cheeks, and suddenly finding myself speechless was only making matters worse. Do you want to help her? Then do your fucking job so she can get paid. Did you even read this? She swiped the tablet from my hand and waved it at me, knowing full well I hadn't read it. Susie was always a pain in my ass, even on the best of days, but when I got on her bad side, it says right here, her finger jabbed at the screen, actress to be paid upon completion of delivered braindance. Doesn't mean it's right. I already knew what Susie would say and could see how the rest of my night was about to go. My jaw tightened as I grit my teeth, preparing for a barrage of venom. That's not your fucking decision. She signed up, the client dropped it off, I've taken it in, and you're going to do the edit. Don't bark orders at me like I'm some kind of, something, Judy? You're in here complaining about eddies all the goddamn time, and when I throw you more work, you complain about the work. Enough is enough. You're not the only fucking editor in Night City. It's not an XBD. The girl is an actress, so either do the fucking edit or get the hell out of here and stay out. Shit. I'd had plenty of blow-ups with Susie before, but I'd never been threatened like that. Clients from all over NC would search me out to get a preem edit, itching for the promise plastered on the walls to be fulfilled, to be, quote, fucked to death. The waiting list was through the roof, or at least it had been. I was the reason Lizzie's was on the map. Wasn't I? I searched Susie's face for some hint she was bluffing and didn't see any. Fine, I spit back, attempting to salvage some pride. But if you bring me one more virtue like this, I'm done. I don't need this shit. I've been sitting down in that fucking basement for years, hauling in eddies for the mocks while you sit up here in your office like some glorified corpo. You want to kick me out? You want to kick me out? Don't tempt me. I rushed out of Susie's office. It wasn't the victory I'd hoped for, but I'd made my point, even if it had been just an empty threat. Susie was right. I needed the eddies. When I reached my den, I threw myself into my chair. I had made a fucking fool out of myself. I reached down and slid the bottom drawer open, pulling the half-empty bottle out and setting it on the desk. Tequila always left a nasty taste in my mouth, and whiskey was atrocious. There was nothing wrong with chugging a beer at the bar, provided I downed something stronger beforehand. I learned that rule long ago. Liquor before beer. You're in the clear. But vodka demanded a glass, which was why I kept a spare one tucked away. After spilling a safe 3-second pour, I put the bottle back in the drawer and raised the glass to my lips. I briefly considered having a second as the familiar calm washed over me, but decided against it. There was no reason to go overboard. I looked back at my read still resting on the editing chair. Judging from the snippet I'd seen earlier, it wouldn't take long to edit. I would likely spend most of my time filtering out all the random thoughts to focus attention on the action. A little background work was in order as well to tone down the seedy surroundings. The scroller had been pretty excited, so hopefully it wouldn't last long. The girl's life story was familiar. She'd bounced around from one BD to the next before getting tossed to the curb so another girl could take her place. Then there'd be a couple years of prostitution and the inevitable drug habit that came with it. Probably dust before moving on to something harder like cockroaches or lace. If she lasted any longer than that, well, the few remaining options wouldn't be good. I grabbed my holo and set a reminder to check in with Roxanne and see if they were hiring at Clouds. It had been a long time, almost 2 years, since I'd last talked to her. Hopefully she hadn't forgotten about me. Referring Katie to a glorified brothel wasn't a great solution. Dolls who worked there weren't raving about their jobs, and there wasn't a future in that line of work. She would earn more, and the behavioral chips would block the ability to remember her encounters. It was better than the path she was already on. I stood with a sigh and grabbed my wreath. All right, Katie, let's try to make you a star. The edit didn't take as long as I'd feared. The scroller had blown his load quickly, and Katie had kept her composure even if the term actress was overly generous. The stark setting had been an advantage. Scene manipulation was something I was good at, and altering the lighting to force the environment to the background was easy. Katie popped out of the image, radiating with an unnatural glow. Her whimpers of discomfort were harder to mask, but anyone watching the finished product would be convinced she was moaning in rapture. Inflection was the key, and knowing when and how to adjust the audio feed was an art. It was the best I could do. Far from the best work I had ever done, but the client wouldn't have any cause for complaints, and if he did, fuck him. With my work done, I shut off my equipment and threw my jacket on, grabbed the shard and tossed it in Susie's desk on my way out the door. Lizzie's was a strange place at closing. The dance floor was still alive with amethyst-colored lasers swinging in sync to the electronic music pulsing from the speakers. The lounges were abandoned, and only a few patrons remained at the bar, clutching their glasses tightly. Mateo wasn't manning his usual spot behind the counter, though it wasn't uncommon for him to help with shutting things down. I spotted Xander Hawthorne seated in a lounge near the back. His black suit coat perfectly matched his slick black hair, and thin lines of cyberware ran along his freshly shaven face. Everything about him exuded style. This look was in stark contrast to the man sitting next to him. His companion wore a flamboyant outfit that left little to the imagination. Xander watched as he placed a straw to his nose and sniffed the thin line of finely ground powder off the table. Seeing Xander reminded me I needed to replenish my stash, but he'd inevitably track me down when it was time to sample his latest wares. I stepped out into the cool night air. The lot was empty except for a woman hunched over and heaving the contents of her stomach onto the pavement. The faint echo of police sirens wailed in the distance. A sudden ping of metal striking metal made me flinch. Fuck! God damn it, Rita! Rita Wheeler stepped away from the door, a smug grin on her face. What's the matter? Spook ya? Fuck you. Don't tempt me, doll. Besides, I know these spikes of mine give you the chills. I scoffed, still catching my breath. Not nearly as much as your hair does, I quipped, noticing her purple hair perfectly matched the metallic accents on her shoulders. Rita's childish pranks annoyed me, but she'd always looked out for me, and not just because she was a fellow Mox. I thought myself daring, having the gang logo tattooed on my neck and arms, but she had gone one step further and signified her membership by having an enormous tattoo proudly etched across her glossy chest. You out of here for the night? Yep. Have a good one. You too, Rita said, swinging the metal bat she held. See you tomorrow. Actually, you won't. I took the day off so I could spend some time with V. I see, Rita said with a sly grin. Hope you two lovebirds have fun. I gave her the finger and a friendly smile and left. The sirens had grown distant, plunging the streets into relative quiet. The air was heavy with the smell of petrichor, and a faint drizzle tickled my face as I walked towards the parking garage. I stepped through the entrance of the enormous concrete structure and caught sight of my van at the far end. The clunky vehicle was hard to miss, even without the sky blue paint and stickers I'd scattered across its faded surface. Keeping an eye on my surroundings was a habit I had learned long ago. The Watson district wasn't renowned for its crime-free nature, and while the badges always claimed to be in control of things, everyone knew it was the Tiger Claws that ran the streets. They mostly dealt in drugs and dolls, but weren't above the occasional mugging or murder. Wrappers crinkled under my feet as I got inside and pressed my finger to the ignition. I muttered the usual litany of encouragements under my breath as I coaxed the engine to life. When I was sure I wouldn't need to call V for a lift, I pulled out of the garage and started on my way home. As I turned onto Kennedy Avenue, my foot seemed heavier than usual. I was making good time, and if I hurried, she might still be awake when I got home. But my heart sank when I spotted blue and red strobing lights in the distance. I slowed to a stop behind a long line of taillights. Fuck, I hissed, slamming my palm against the wheel. I craned my neck and squinted, resisting the temptation to join the chorus of angry horns. I could make out the silhouettes of the badges moving between the lights. It looked like they were picking something up off of the road. Slumping back in my seat, I felt a pang of guilt. While I was busy being pissed off over a brief delay, someone in Night City was about to receive the worst news possible. But I still wanted them to hurry, which only made me feel worse. The badges soon got traffic moving. As I drove past, I couldn't help looking. It was difficult to tell if the puddles were rain or blood. A pair of Valentinos were bent over the hood of a police car with their hands cuffed behind them. Spent shell casings littered the ground. I turned my attention back to the road and sighed. Just another night in NC. My eyes were heavy as I turned onto Charter Street and spotted the familiar apartment complex. It had been more than a year since I'd last seen the landlord. I assumed he was still alive since someone was raking in our eddies each month, but the dilapidated state of the building reflected his absence. Most of the blue paint had peeled away, revealing thick slabs of gray concrete. A deep crack stretched across the long side of the building, and a thin plume of steam sprayed out of a broken condenser line near the roof. But I could still see the vibrant home it had been when I'd moved here with my grandparents. Things had been different, back then. The building had been cleaner, the neighbors friendlier, and the skyline had offered fresh promises of fame and fortune. Years passed. There wasn't any one moment where reality hit me like a ton of bricks. Instead, it was like my adolescence had been dropped in a vat of acid. Every promise and hope dissolved away, exposing the lies underneath until eventually I'd settled into the woman I was now. A few more tattoos and an extra wrinkle or two, but me, more or less. I pulled into the narrow lot behind the building, making a wide turn to avoid the growing piles of trash. The van skidded against the wet pavement before coming to a stop. I started the long trek up the fire escape. If the building were any taller, I'd need knee implants before I hit my mid-30s. Christ, I still wasn't used to telling others, or myself, that I was now in my 30s. A thick layer of graffiti coated the hallway leading to our front door. Some of the art was quite good. The giant penis stretching over our neighbor's door was a bit much, even by my standards, but it still provoked a laugh every so often. It sounded like the couple on the first floor were having one hell of an argument. Hopefully they would shut things up before someone called the badges again. I stopped outside our door and bit my lip. This was the best part of my day, and I wanted to savor it. Finally, I swiped my wrist over the biometric panel and the door slid open. A dim, purple light greeted me as I stepped inside. My heart fluttered when I saw a woman lying on the couch in the living room, right where I expected her to be. I kicked my shoes off and tossed my jacket onto the floor. She didn't budge an inch. I sighed, realizing I would have to wake her ass up and drag her off to bed as usual. I tiptoed my way closer, not wanting to startle her. The cotton candy couple. That's what Rita had called us that rare night we'd gone out for some fun and hit up the bar at Lizzie's. I should have hated the nickname, but it was simply too cute and too true not to love. I knelt and ran a gentle hand through her thick pink hair. It normally ran neatly down the side of her head, but it was now splayed across the cushion. I traced my finger along the thin metallic line running underneath her eye towards the chrome port on her temple. It was smaller than mine and certainly wasn't jarring to look at. In fact, even if it wasn't top-shelf cyberware, it complemented her complexion nicely. She still hadn't noticed me. Her chest kept rising and falling rhythmically under her black sin leather jacket. A small stab of regret poked me as I gave a gentle shake. V? V's eyes parted and she peered at me blearily. Shush, it's me. V groaned in protest and closed her eyes. Fuck. V had always been a deep sleeper, and the couch had practically become a second bed for her over the last year. Still, she must have had one hell of a hard day for me to be having this much trouble rousing her. So much for catching up tonight. Quality, not quantity. That's what I kept telling myself. I cracked a smile despite my disappointment. It was still better than being jolted awake by another one of her nightmares. That woman could scream her lungs out when she wanted to, which, thankfully, hadn't been in a long time. Besides, it wasn't like she'd forgotten about me. As disheartening as it was not getting to spend time with her, my heart still glowed knowing she'd fought as hard as she could to wait up for me. I gave her another nudge. A deeper, angrier grumble was the only response I got. Come on, V. Let's get you to bed. V slowly rose from the couch with her eyes barely open. She stumbled, and for a second I thought she would crash onto the table next to the couch, but she steadied herself before coming to a halt. Wait, was she actually falling asleep while standing up? Come on, V, I snorted. I took her by the arm and urged her towards the bedroom. It wasn't hard to peel her clothes off. She was pliant, and I questioned if she was truly awake. Not that I blamed her, my own eyes felt like there were weights on them as I shuffled out of my jeans. V remained standing in her shirt and underwear, eyes closed, a grumpy expression on her face. But there was something indescribably sexy seeing her like this. Her smooth skin was bathed in soft, ambient light from the living room, and I could see the outlines of her nipples poking against the thin fabric of her shirt, almost begging to be touched. My pulse raced as a heat flared between my legs. But she was tired, damn it. Exhausted. Sighing, I motioned V towards the bed and pulled back the blanket. She was under the covers before I knew it, and by the time I had shuffled into bed next to her, she was breathing deeply once more. I smiled and planted a kiss on her brow. The faint taste of dried sweat lingered on my lips. It was strangely comforting as I rested my head on the pillow and closed my eyes. I'd nearly drifted off when something warm and moist pressed against my forehead, causing my eyes to pop open in surprise. "Good night," V whispered, pulling her lips away from my skin. "Good night." I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer and fell asleep, not knowing a hint of a smile lingered on my face. It was a good night indeed.